The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty trail as Maya stumbled forward, one foot after another. Her worn leather boots had holes that let in every pebble and grain of sand. The old brown coat that once belonged to her father hung loose around her thin shoulders like a tent. She pulled it tighter, even though the day was already getting hot. Maya had been walking for 3 days straight. Her stomach felt like it was eating itself from the inside. The last piece of bread she'd eaten was nothing more than a memory now. Her lips were cracked and dry, and she kept licking them even though it made them worse. In the distance, she could see buildings rising from the desert floor like a mirage, but this wasn't a trick of her tired mind. This was real. This was Red Rock Valley, the town she'd been told about by a kind stranger 2 weeks ago. "There's work out there," the old man had said, tipping his hat. "Good people who pay fair wages for honest work." Maya hoped he was right. She had to be right. She had nowhere else to go. As she got closer to the town, she could see it wasn't very big. Maybe 50 buildings at most. There was a main street with a general store, a saloon, and what looked like a church at the far end. But what caught her attention was the large ranch house sitting on a hill just outside of town. It was a 2-story wooden building, painted white with green shutters. A wide porch wrapped around the front, and there were flower boxes under the windows. Even from a distance, she could tell someone took good care of this place. Maya had learned to read the signs. A well-kept property usually meant the owners had money, and money meant they might need help. She adjusted the small bundle of belongings on her back and headed toward the ranch. As she walked up the long dirt road leading to the house, she passed wooden fences that stretched as far as she could see. Cattle grazed in the fields, their brown and black hides gleaming in the sun. This was definitely a working ranch, and a successful one by the looks of it. Her heart started beating faster. Not from the walk, but from hope mixed with fear. Hope that she might finally find work and a place to stay. Fear that they'd turn her away just like all the others had. The porch steps creaked under her feet as she climbed them. She raised her hand to knock on the heavy wooden door, but before her knuckles could touch the wood, she heard a voice behind her. "You lost, miss?" Maya spun around, startled. A man was leaning against the porch railing, and she wondered how she'd missed seeing him there. He was tall, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it. His clothes were simple but clean, dark pants, a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and boots that had seen plenty of work but were well maintained. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. They were the color of storm clouds, gray with hints of blue, and they seemed to see right through her. "I'm sorry," Maya said, taking a step back. "I didn't see you there. I was hoping to speak with whoever owns this place about work." The man straightened up and crossed his arms. "That would be me. Name's Jake Sullivan. This is my ranch." Maya felt her cheeks grow warm. She'd assumed he was just a ranch hand, not the owner. "I'm Maya Chun. I'm looking for any kind of work, cooking, cleaning, helping with animals. I'm a hard worker and I don't eat much." Jake studied her for a long moment. His gray eyes took in her torn dress, her father's oversized coat, and the way she swayed slightly on her feet from exhaustion. "When did you last eat?" he asked. The question was so direct and unexpected that Maya felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back quickly. "I had some water this morning." "That's not what I asked." Maya looked down at her boots. 3 days ago? Maybe 4? I lose track." Jake was quiet for so long that Maya started to worry she'd said something wrong. When she looked up, she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You got family somewhere?" he asked. "No, sir, it's just me now. Where are you from? Back east?" "My father passed last winter," and double quotes. Maya trailed off. She didn't need to burden this stranger with her whole sad story. Jake nodded like he understood anyway. "You ever work on a ranch before?" "Some. My father had a small place. I know how to cook, clean, mend clothes, tend to sick animals, and keep books if needed. I can work from sunrise to sunset, and I don't complain." "I can see that," Jake said, and there was something almost gentle in his voice now. "Maya, I'm going to be straight with you. I do need help around here. This place is too big for one person to manage alone. Maya's heart leaped. I'll take any job you have, Mr. Sullivan. I promise you won't regret it. Jake held up a hand. Let me finish. I've got two options for you, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Maya nodded, though she couldn't imagine turning down any offer at this point. First option, Jake said, counting on his finger, you can work here for room and board. I'll give you the small cabin out back, 3 meals a day, and a few dollars at the end of each month. It's honest work, and I'll treat you fair. That sounded like a dream come true to Maya, a roof over her head, regular meals, and even a little money. She started to say yes, but Jake continued. Second option, he said, and his voice got quieter. You can be my wife. Maya felt like someone had just dumped a bucket of cold water over her head. I'm sorry, what? Jake looked uncomfortable now, but he didn't back down. I know how it sounds, but hear me out. This ranch is successful, but it's lonely. I need a partner, someone to help make this place a real home. You need security and a place to belong. We could help each other. Maya stared at him. You don't even know me. I know you're brave enough to walk into the middle of nowhere looking for work. I know you're honest enough to tell a stranger you haven't eaten in 3 days instead of lying about it. And I know you're strong enough to keep going even when everything seems hopeless. But marriage? Maya shook her head. That's not something you just decide, like picking what to have for dinner? Why not? Jake asked. People get married for all sorts of reasons. Love, money, loneliness, convenience. At least we'd both know exactly what we're getting into from the start. Maya's mind was racing. This was crazy. She'd come here looking for a job, not a husband. She barely knew this man. But then again, what did she really have to lose? She was completely alone in the world, with no money, no home, and no prospects. You can work for food, Jake said, his storm gray eyes locked on hers, or be my wife, your choice. The words hung in the hot desert air between them. Maya looked at Jake's weathered hands resting on the porch railing. They were strong hands, honest hands. The hands of a man who worked hard and took care of what was his, without really knowing why. Maya stepped forward and grabbed Jake's hand with both of hers. His skin was warm and calloused, and she could feel the strength in his fingers. She looked up into his surprised gray eyes and made her choice without saying a single word. Jake looked down at Maya's small hands wrapped around his larger one. Her grip was firm, determined, but he could feel the slight tremor that ran through her fingers. Whether it was from hunger, exhaustion, or nerves, he couldn't tell. Maybe all three. Well then, he said quietly, his voice rougher than usual. I guess that settles it. Maya didn't let go of his hand right away. She seemed to be studying his face, looking for something. Maybe she was trying to figure out if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. Come on inside, Jake said, gently pulling his hand free. You need food first. We can talk about everything else after you've had a proper meal. Maya followed him through the front door, and her eyes went wide as she looked around. The inside of the house was even nicer than the outside. The floors were polished wood, and there were actual rugs scattered around instead of just bare boards. A big stone fireplace dominated one wall of the living room, with comfortable-looking chairs arranged around it. This is beautiful, Maya said softly. Jake glanced around like he was seeing the place through her eyes. It's too big for one person. That's part of the problem. He led her into the kitchen, which was easily twice the size of the entire cabin Maya had grown up in. There was a proper cook stove, a large wooden table, and shelves lined with dishes and supplies. Sit, Jake said, pointing to a chair at the table. I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage the basics. Maya sank into the chair gratefully. It felt strange to be sitting on something so solid and comfortable after days of sleeping on the hard ground. She watched as Jake moved around the kitchen with surprising efficiency. You do cook, she observed as he sliced bread and pulled cold meat from the icebox. I've been living alone for 3 years. You learn fast or you starve. He set a plate in front of her with thick slices of bread, meat, cheese, and an apple. Eat slow, your stomach won't thank you if you rush it. Maya wanted to devour everything on the plate, but she forced herself to take small bites. The bread was fresh and soft, better than anything she'd tasted in months. The meat was real beef, not the scraps she'd been able to afford when she had. Jake sat across from her with his own plate, though he seemed more interested in watching her eat than touching his own food. So, he said after a few minutes, we should probably talk about what this arrangement would actually mean. Maya paused with a piece of bread halfway to her mouth. I suppose we should. First thing you need to understand is that this would be a real marriage. Legal and binding. We'd go to the church in town, sign the papers, the whole thing. Why? Maya asked. I mean, why do you want to get married at all? You seem to be doing fine on your own. Jake was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. You ever hear of the Homestead Act? Maya nodded. Land grants for settlers who can prove they're working the land. That's right. Well, there's additional land available for married couples. Good grazing land that would double the size of this ranch. But you have to be married to qualify, and you have to prove you're actually living as husband and wife. Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks. What exactly does that mean? It means we'd have to share the same house and convince the government inspector that we're a real married couple when he comes around. Jake's cheeks looked a little red too. But that doesn't mean... this would be a business arrangement. You'd have your own room, your own space. Nothing would happen between us unless we both wanted it to. Maya studied his face. He seemed sincere, but she'd learned the hard way that men didn't always mean what they said. What would my duties be? She asked carefully. Running the household. Mostly cooking, cleaning, maybe helping with the books. I handle most of the ranch work with my men, but having someone manage the house would be a huge help. And in return, you'd have a home, security, your name on the deed to this property. If anything happened to me, the ranch would be half yours. Jake leaned forward. Maya, I'm not asking you to be my servant. I'm asking you to be my partner. The word partner hit Maya harder than she expected. She'd been on her own for so long, making every decision by herself, carrying every burden alone. The idea of having someone to share the load with was almost too good to believe. How do I know you're not just saying all this to get me to agree? She asked. Jake stood up and walked to a wooden desk in the corner of the kitchen. He pulled out a sheet of paper and brought it back to the table. I wrote this up while you were eating, he said, setting it down in front of her. It's a list of what we're both agreeing to. Your responsibilities, my responsibilities, and what happens if either of us wants out of the arrangement. Maya picked up the paper and read it carefully. Jake's handwriting was neat and precise, and he'd thought of details she wouldn't have considered. Things like how much money she'd have for her household expenses, what would happen if she got sick, even provisions for her to visit family if she had any. You really thought this through, she said. I've been thinking about it for months. I just never found the right person to ask before. What made you think I was the right person? You don't know anything about me. Jake smiled for the first time since she'd arrived, and it transformed his whole face. You walked up to a stranger's house when you were starving and asked for work instead of charity. That tells me a lot about your character. Maya felt something. Warm spread through her chest. It had been a long time since anyone had seen strength in her instead of just desperation. There's something else we need to discuss, Jake said, his expression growing serious again. The wedding would need to happen soon, within the week probably. The government inspector is coming next month, and we need time to settle in before then. A week? Maya's voice came out higher than she intended. I know it's fast. But Maya, I want to be clear about something. This marriage would be real, but it doesn't have to be forever. If either of us find someone we actually want to marry for love, we can figure out how to dissolve this arrangement. Maya looked around the warm, comfortable kitchen, then down at the plate of food that had probably saved her life. She thought about sleeping in a real bed tonight instead of on the cold ground. She thought about having a place to belong, even if it wasn't quite the way she'd always imagined. What do people in town think about all this? She asked. They don't. No yet, but people around here mind their own business mostly. As long as we're not causing trouble, they'll leave us alone. Maya folded the paper and handed it back to Jake. I need to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth. All right. Are you a good man? Because I've met some men who weren't, and I can't afford to make that mistake again. Jake met her eyes steadily. I've never hit a woman. I've never cheated anyone in business. I pay my workers fair wages, and I keep my word when I give it. Beyond that, you'll have to decide for yourself. Maya believed him. Maybe she was being foolish, but something in his gray eyes told her he was telling the truth. All right, she said quietly. Let's do it. Jake nodded once, like they'd just agreed on the price of cattle instead of the rest of their lives. I'll take you to town tomorrow to meet the preacher and get things arranged. Tonight you can have the room upstairs on the right. There's clean sheets on the bed and water for washing. As Maya climbed the stairs to what would be her new room, she couldn't help but wonder what she'd just gotten herself into. The small church bell chimed 10 times as Maya stood in front of the cracked mirror in the back room, smoothing down her mother's blue dress for the 100th time. Her hands were shaking, and she couldn't seem to make them stop. You're doing the right thing, she whispered to her reflection. But the woman looking back at her didn't seem convinced. The dress had been carefully mended, where mice had gotten to it during her travels. The blue fabric was faded but still pretty, and it fit her better now that she'd had 4 days of regular meals. Jake had insisted she eat properly before the wedding, saying no bride of his would look half-starved at the altar. A gentle knock on the door made her jump. Maya, you ready? It was Pastor Williams, a kindly old man with white hair who'd asked surprisingly few questions when Jake had requested the ceremony. As ready as I'll ever be, Maya called back, though her voice cracked a little. She opened the door and found the pastor waiting with a warm smile. You look lovely, my dear. That dress brings out the color of your eyes. Maya managed a small smile in return. Thank you, Pastor. I appreciate you doing this on such short notice. Jake's a good man, the pastor said as they walked toward the main part of the church. Been watching him build that ranch from nothing for years. He deserves some happiness. Maya nodded, though she wondered if what they were doing could really be called happiness. It was practical, sensible, mutually beneficial, but happiness? That remained to be seen. The church was small and simple, with wooden pews and sunlight streaming through plain glass windows. Jake stood at the front wearing a dark suit Maya had never seen before. His hair was combed back neatly, and he'd shaved. He looked nervous, too, which somehow made Maya feel a little better. Behind him stood 2 witnesses, Tom Bradley, who ran the general store, and his wife Helen. They'd volunteered when Jake mentioned needing witnesses, and Maya was grateful not to have complete strangers watching her get married. Jake turned as Maya walked down the short aisle, and something flickered in his gray eyes. Not love, exactly, but something warmer than the careful politeness they'd maintained for the past few days. You look beautiful, he said quietly when she reached him. Thank you, Maya whispered back. You clean up pretty well yourself. Pastor Williams opened his worn Bible and began the ceremony. The words felt strange and dreamlike to Maya. She'd imagined her wedding day many times as a girl, but never like this. Never as a business arrangement with a man she'd known for less than a week. But when Jake took her hands for the vows, his touch was gentle and steady. His voice was clear and certain as he promised to honor and protect her. When it was Maya's turn, she found herself meaning the words more than she'd expected. You may kiss the bride, Pastor Williams announced. Jake hesitated for just a moment, his eyes meeting Maya's. Then he leaned down and pressed a soft, brief kiss to her lips. It was their first kiss, and Maya felt heat spread through her cheeks at the contact. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, the pastor said with a broad smile. Mrs. Sullivan. Maya had a new name now, a new identity. She wasn't sure how she felt about that yet. Tom and Helen offered their congratulations and best wishes before heading back to their store. Pastor Williams shook Jake's hand and kissed Maya's cheek, then sent them off with promises to visit soon. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Maya sat beside Jake on the wagon seat, her hands folded in her lap, watching the familiar landscape roll by. It looked different now somehow, knowing it was her home too. Any regrets? Jake asked as they turned up the road to the house. Maya considered the question seriously. Ask me again in a few months. Jake chuckled. Fair enough. Back at the house, Maya changed out of her good dress and into the simple work clothes Jake had bought for her in town. It felt good to put on something practical, something that belonged to this new life she was building. I should probably show you the books, Jake said over lunch. You mentioned you could help with that. Maya nodded. My father taught me numbers. I'm good with keeping track of expenses and income. Jake led her to his office, a small room off the living area with a desk covered in papers. I'm not bad with figures, but I hate the paperwork part. Been putting it off for weeks. Maya looked at the scattered receipts and invoices and felt her fingers itch to organize them. This won't take long to sort out. As she worked, Jake explained the ranch operations. He had 15 head of cattle, 3 horses, and 2 ranch hands who came in daily to help with the heavy work. The ranch turned a decent profit, enough to live comfortably and save for expansion. The men will be here tomorrow morning. Jake? Sod. Carlos and Pete, they're good workers, but they might be curious about you. Curious how? Jake shifted uncomfortably. They know I've been a bachelor for 3 years. A sudden wife might raise some questions. Maya looked up from the papers she was sorting. What kind of questions? Whether you're really my wife or just some woman I'm paying to play a part. The words stung more than Maya expected. And what will you tell them? The truth. That you're my wife and they'll treat you with respect or find work somewhere else. Maya felt a warm flutter in her chest at his protective tone. I can handle curious ranch hands, Jake. I'm tougher than I look. I'm starting to figure that out. The next morning brought Maya's first real test. She was in the kitchen making breakfast when she heard voices outside. Through the window, she could see Jake talking to 2 men near the barn. One was older, probably in his 50s, with graying hair and a weathered face. The other was younger, maybe Jake's age, with sandy hair and an easy smile. Maya took a deep breath and walked outside with a plate of fresh biscuits. Carlos, Pete, Jake called as she approached. I'd like you to meet my wife, Maya. The older man, Carlos, tipped his hat politely. Ma'am, congratulations to you both. Pete, the younger one, looked skeptical. Wife? Jake, you didn't mention anything about getting married when we talked last week. Maya felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her voice steady. It was rather sudden. Sometimes life moves faster than we expect. Sudden is right, Pete said with a laugh that didn't sound entirely friendly. What's it been, a week since anyone's seen a woman around here? Jake's jaw tightened. Pete, I'm just saying it's mighty convenient timing. What with the land inspector coming and all? Maya's temper flared. She'd dealt with men who thought they could intimidate her before. Mr. Pete, is it? I understand your surprise. But whether my marriage is convenient or not isn't really your concern. What is your concern is whether you want to keep working. For my husband, Pete's eyebrows shot up. Carlos coughed to hide what sounded like a chuckle. She's got you there, Pete, Carlos said. And ma'am, if you don't mind me saying, those biscuits smell amazing. Jake's cooking has been ... challenging. Maya smiled, tension easing slightly. Would you like to try one? I made plenty. As the men ate her biscuits and complimented her cooking, Maya began to relax. Carlos was genuinely kind, and even Pete seemed to warm up to her once he realized she wasn't going to be intimidated. Ma'am, Carlos said as they prepared to start their work, if you need anything around the house fixed or moved, just let us know. It'll be nice having someone here who can actually cook. After the men left for the fields, Jake turned to Maya with something like admiration in his eyes. You handled that well. Did you think I wouldn't? I wasn't sure. Pete can be difficult when he wants to be. Maya picked up the empty biscuit plate. Jake, if we're going to make this work, you need to trust that I can handle myself. I'm not some fragile flower that's going to wilt at the first sign of trouble. Jake nodded slowly. You're right, I'm still getting used to having a partner. So, I'm one, Maya admitted, but we'll figure it out. As she walked back to the house, Maya realized something had shifted between them. They were starting to feel like a team. 3 weeks into their marriage, Maya had transformed the Sullivan Ranch house in ways that surprised even her. The windows sparkled, letting in more light than Jake remembered seeing in years. Fresh curtains hung in every room, sewn from fabric she'd found in the general store. The smell of fresh bread and real cooking had replaced the stale air of bachelor living, but it was the small touches that made the biggest difference. Wildflowers in mason jars on the kitchen table. Books arranged neatly on the shelf by the fireplace. The way she'd organized his office so he could actually find things. The house felt alive now, like a real home instead of just a place to sleep. Jake found himself looking forward to coming inside at the end of each day, knowing Maya would be there. Not because she had to be, but because she'd chosen to make this place her own. "You've been busy," he said one evening, finding her in the kitchen with ledger books spread across the table. Numbers filled page after page in her neat handwriting. "I wanted to understand how everything works," Maya said, not looking up from her calculations. "Your books are in good shape, but I think we could save money in a few places." Jake sat down across from her, curious. "Like what?" Maya turned the ledger around so he could see. "You're paying too much for feed. Tom Bradley is a nice man, but his prices are higher than they need to be. There's a supplier in Millerville who could deliver the same quality for 20% less." Jake studied the numbers. Matthew had done her homework, comparing prices from 3 different suppliers and calculating delivery costs. "You figured all this out in 3 weeks?" "I like numbers," Maya said with a small smile. "They make sense in a way that people don't. Always. What else did you find?" Maya flipped through several pages. "You could get a better price for your cattle if you sold them in the fall instead of summer. The market is higher then. And if you planted winter wheat in the south field, you could use it for feed and sell the surplus." Jake leaned back in his chair, impressed. "Where did you learn all this?" "My father wasn't just a small farmer before he ... Maya paused, choosing her words carefully. "Before things went bad, he was good with business. He taught me to see the bigger picture, not just the day-to-day expenses." There was pain in her voice when she mentioned her father, and Jake didn't push for details. Everyone had parts of their past they'd rather not talk about. "These are good ideas," Jake said. "We should try them." Maya looked up, surprised. "Really? You trust my judgment that much?" "Maya, you've been here 3 weeks and you've already made this place run smoother than it has in years. Why wouldn't I trust your judgment?" A flush of pleasure colored Maya's cheeks. "Thank you, that means a lot." The next morning brought an unexpected test of Maya's other skills. Jake was working with Storm, a young stallion he'd bought to improve his breeding stock. The horse was beautiful but temperamental, and Jake was having trouble getting him to accept a saddle. Maya watched from the fence as Jake tried for the 3rd time to approach the nervous animal. Storm would let Jake get close, then dart away at the last second, ears pinned back and eyes rolling. "He's scared," Maya called out. "He's stubborn," Jake replied, frustration clear in his voice. "No, look at his ears, the way he's holding his head. He's scared, not defiant." Jake paused, studying the horse more carefully. Maya was right. Storm's body language showed fear, not aggression. "You seem to know horses," Jake said. Maya climbed down from the fence and walked slowly toward Storm. The horse watched her approach, but didn't move away. "My father bred horses before he turned to farming," Maya said softly, her voice calm and steady. "He always said you have to think like the horse, not like a human." She stopped a few feet from Storm and stood still, letting him get used to her presence. The horse snorted and pawed the ground but didn't back away. "What happened to him?" Maya asked, her voice still quiet. "Something scared him badly," Jake thought about it. "The man I bought him from mentioned a barn fire. Storm was trapped inside for a while before they got him out. That explains it." Maya took another small step forward. Storm's ears twitched, but stayed upright. Fire would make any horse afraid of enclosed spaces. A saddle probably feels like being trapped all over again. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a piece of apple. Storm's nostrils flared as he caught the scent. "Easy, boy," Maya murmured. "Nobody's going to hurt you." To Jake's amazement, Storm stretched his neck out and delicately took the apple from Maya's hand. She stroked his nose gently, talking to him in a low, soothing voice. "How did you do that?" Jake asked. "Patience." "And understanding what he's really afraid of," Maya continued, petting Storm's neck. "He needs to learn that being close to people doesn't mean being trapped. It'll take time." Jake watched as Maya worked with the horse for the next hour. She never rushed, never forced. She let Storm set the pace, rewarding every small step forward with gentle praise and treats. By the end of the session, Storm was letting Maya touch his back and sides. Not ready for a saddle yet, but making progress. "You're amazing with him," Jake said as they walked back to the house. Maya shrugged. "Animals are easier than people sometimes. They're honest about what they're feeling." That evening, as they went over the books together, Jake found himself studying Maya's profile in the lamplight. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and she had a small frown of concentration as she worked through the numbers. "Maya," he said suddenly. "Mum?" She didn't look up from the ledger. "Why did you really come west? You're clearly educated, good with numbers, good with animals. You could have found work back east." Maya's pen stopped moving. She was quiet for so long that Jake thought she wasn't going to answer. "My father made some bad choices," she said finally. "When he died, those choices became my problem. I couldn't stay where people knew my name." "What kind of choices?" Maya closed the ledger and looked at him directly. "The kind that made it unsafe for me to stay." "That's all I can say right now," Jake nodded. He understood about having parts of your past you couldn't talk about. "Well, I'm glad you ended up here, are you?" Maya asked. "Really? Really? This place feels like home for the first time since—" Jake paused. "Since my family died?" Maya's expression softened. "You don't talk about them much. Prairie Fire took my parents and younger sister when I was 25. I built this ranch afterward, partly to honor their memory and partly because I didn't know what else to do with myself." "I'm sorry," Maya said quietly. "That must have been terrible." "It was. But having you here, it's like the house is alive again. Like it has a purpose beyond just keeping me busy." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sound the scratching of Maya's pen as she made notes in the margins of the ledger. "Jake," Maya said eventually. "Yeah? When you asked me to marry you, did you think it would be like this?" "Like what?" Maya gestured around the cozy kitchen, at the organized papers, at the easy way they'd fallen into working together. "Like we actually fit together," Jake considered the question. "I hoped it would be, but I wasn't sure. I've been alone for a long time." "So have I," Maya said. "It's nice having someone to share things with, even if it's just numbers and difficult horses," Jake smiled. "Especially difficult horses." As Maya went back to her calculations, Jake realized something had changed between them over the past few weeks. They weren't just two people sharing a house anymore. They were becoming a team, partners in the truest sense, and that scared him almost as much as it pleased him. The trouble started with whispered conversations at the general store. Maya noticed it first when she went to town for supplies. People would stop talking when she walked by, then start up again in hushed tones after she passed. "Something's got folks spooked," Tom Bradley told her as he wrapped her purchases. 3 ranches hit by rustlers in the past 2 weeks. Lost nearly 40 head of cattle between them. Maya's blood ran cold. Which ranches? The Morrison place, the Stevens farm, and just yesterday, the Weatherby spread. Tom leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Word is they're targeting the smaller operations first, testing to see how much fight folks have in them." Maya thanked Tom and hurried home, her mind racing. The Sullivan Ranch wasn't the smallest in the area, but it wasn't the largest either. With only 15 head of cattle, they'd be an easy target for thieves looking for quick money. Jake was in the barn when she returned, checking on Storm's progress. The stallion had been letting Maya work with him daily, and today he'd finally accepted a light blanket on his back. "Jake," Maya called. As she approached, "We need to talk." Something in her voice made him look up immediately. "What's wrong?" Maya told him what she'd heard in town. Jake's expression grew darker with each detail. "Damn," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "I was hoping the trouble would stay south of here. You knew about this?" Carlos mentioned. "Hearing rumors, but I didn't think they'd work their way up here so fast." Jake looked troubled. "The Weatherby place is only 10 miles south of us." That evening, Jake called Carlos and Pete to the house for an emergency meeting. Maya served coffee and listened as the men discussed their options. "We could move the cattle closer to the house," Pete suggested. "Keep them in the near pasture where we can watch them better." Carlos shook his head. "That pasture's too small for all 15 head. They'd overgraze it in a week. What about taking shifts?" Maya asked. "Someone could watch the herd at night?" The three men looked at her in surprise. Jake recovered first. "That's not a bad idea," he said slowly. "We could set up a schedule. 2 men on watch each night." 3 men, Maya corrected. "I can handle a rifle as well as anyone," Pete snorted. "No offense, ma'am, but rustlers aren't exactly the type to be scared off by a woman with a gun." Maya's eyes flashed dangerously. "You'd be surprised what a woman with a gun can accomplish when she's protecting her home." "Maya," Jake said gently, "I appreciate the offer, but nothing," Maya interrupted. "This is my ranch too, remember? If someone's trying to steal our cattle, I have just as much right to defend them as you do." Carlos cleared his throat. "If I may say so, having an extra pair of eyes wouldn't hurt." "And ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, do you actually know how to use a rifle?" Maya smiled grimly. "My father taught me to hunt when I was 12. I can hit a rabbit at 50 yards. Jake studied her face, seeing a determination there that he'd glimpsed before but never fully appreciated. "All right, we'll work out a schedule for 3 people. Over the next few days, they settled into a routine of constant vigilance. Maya took the early evening shift, from sunset until midnight. Jake and the others rotated through the later hours. During the day, they tried to maintain normal routines, but everyone was on edge. Maya found herself looking forward to her watch duty. There was something peaceful about sitting under the stars with her father's old rifle across her knees, listening to the gentle sounds of the cattle settling down for the night. It gave her time to think about how much her life had changed in just a few weeks. On the 4th night, her peaceful routine was shattered. Maya was sitting on a small hill overlooking the main pasture when she heard it, the soft sound of horses moving slowly through the grass. But it was the wrong direction for Jake or the others to be coming from. Her heart started pounding as she counted the shadows moving between the cattle. 4 men, maybe 5. They were working quietly, trying to separate a small group of steers. From the main herd, Maya raised her rifle and fired a shot into the air. The sound echoed across the valley like thunder. "Get away from our cattle!" she shouted at the top of her lungs. The rustlers froze for a moment, then spurred their horses toward the separated steers. Maya fired again, this time aiming closer to the riders. One of them cursed loudly as her shot kicked up dirt near his horse's hooves. In the distance, Maya could hear Jake and the others responding to her shots, their horses' hooves pounding against the hard ground as they raced toward the pasture. The rustlers realized they were outnumbered and outgunned. They abandoned their attempt to steal the cattle and rode hard toward the southern ridge, disappearing into the darkness. Jake reached Maya first, his horse sliding to a stop beside her position. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, swinging down from his saddle. "I'm fine," Maya said, though she was shaking from the adrenaline. "They were trying to take the cattle from the south end. I counted 4, maybe 5 riders." Carlos and Pete arrived moments later, breathing hard. "Did you get a good look at them?" Carlos asked. Maya shook her head. "Too dark, but they knew what they were doing. They almost had 6 head separated before I spotted them." "Good eyes," Pete said, and there was genuine respect in his voice now. "If you hadn't been watching, we'd have woken up to find half our herd missing." Jake helped Maya down from the hill, his hand warm and steady on her arm. "You did good," he said quietly. "Real good." Back at the house, Maya made coffee while the men discussed what to do next. Her hands were steadier now, but she could still feel Jake watching her with something that looked like admiration mixed with concern. "They'll probably try a different ranch tomorrow night," Carlos said. "Rustlers don't usually hit the same place twice in a row." "Maybe," Jake replied, "but we can't take that chance. We'll keep up the watch schedule for another week at least." After Carlos and Pete left, Jake and Maya sat at the kitchen table, both too wound up from the excitement to sleep. "You could have been killed tonight," Jake said suddenly. Maya looked up from her coffee cup. "So could you. So could Carlos or Pete. That's the risk we all took when we decided to fight back." "It's different with you. Why? Because I'm a woman?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. "Because you're my wife," he said finally, "and I care what happens to you." The words hung in the air between them, heavier than either had expected. Maya felt her heart skip a beat at the emotion in Jake's voice. "I care what happens to you too," she said softly. Jake reached across the table and took her hand. His fingers were rough from ranch work, but his touch was gentle. "Maya, this arrangement. We have ... It's not just business anymore, is it?" Maya looked down at their joined hands. "No," she whispered. "I don't think it is." They sat in the quiet kitchen, holding hands and listening to the distant sounds of the cattle settling back down. Something had changed between them tonight, something that went beyond their practical marriage or their partnership in running the ranch, but neither of them was quite ready to say what that something was. 2 weeks after the rustler attack, Maya thought life was finally settling into a comfortable rhythm. The cattle were safe, the ranch was running smoothly, and she and Jake had found an easy partnership that felt more natural every day. She should have known it was too good to last. The stranger arrived on a Tuesday morning while Jake was out checking the fence line with Carlos and Pete. Maya was hanging laundry behind the house when she heard a horse approaching. She looked up to see a well-dressed man in a black suit riding up the main path. Something about him made her stomach clench with worry. He sat too straight in his saddle, looked around too carefully, like a man who made his living finding things people didn't want found. Maya wiped her hands on her apron and walked around to the front of the house to greet him. "Can I help you?" she called out. The man dismounted and tipped his hat. He was probably in his 40s, with gray streaking his dark hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to take in every detail of her appearance. "Mrs. Sullivan, I presume?" "Thomas Brennan. I've come a long way to speak with you." Maya's blood turned to ice. She knew that name. Had been running from it for months. "I think you have me confused with someone else," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Brennan smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Oh, I don't think so. You've led me quite a chase, Miss Chun, or should I say Mrs. Sullivan now?" Maya's legs felt weak. She gripped the porch railing to keep herself upright. "What do you want?" "I want what your father owed me." "With interest, of course. It's been a year since he died, and debts don't disappear just because the debtor does. My father's debts died with him." Brennan pulled a thick envelope from his coat pocket. "Actually, they didn't. You see, your father was quite clever with paperwork. When he needed money for his gambling habits, he put up his property as collateral. But when that wasn't enough, he had his daughter sign additional papers." Maya's heart sank as Brennan unfolded several documents. Even from a distance, she could see her own signature on the bottom of the pages. "I never agreed to be responsible for his debts," she said. "But you did sign these loan guarantees. Your signature, your promise to pay if your father couldn't." Brennan's smile grew wider. "Of course, I doubt you read the fine print. Most people don't." Maya remembered those papers now. Her father had told her they were property deeds, legal documents that needed her signature to keep the small farm in the family. She'd been 17 and trusted him completely. "How much?" she asked quietly. $8,000, plus interest. And collection fees, of course. The number hit Maya like a physical blow. $8,000 might as well have been $8 million. It was more money than most people saw in a lifetime. I don't have that kind of money. I figured as much. But fortunately for you, I'm a reasonable man. I'm willing to accept alternative arrangements. The way he said it made Maya's skin crawl. What kind of arrangements? Well, you could come back east with me, work off the debt in one of my establishments. Pretty young woman like you could earn good money in the right situation. Maya felt sick. She knew exactly what kind of establishment he was talking about. No, she said firmly. Then I'll have to contact the territorial marshal. Fraud is a serious crime out here, even more so than back east. You could face 5 years in prison. It wasn't fraud. I didn't know what I was signing. Ignorance isn't a legal defense, my dear. Besides, I have witnesses who'll swear you knew exactly what those papers said. Maya stared at him, trapped. She could run again, but Brennan had found her once. He'd find her again, and now she had Jake to think about. If she disappeared, it would ruin his reputation and his chances for the land grant. I need time to think, she said. Of course. I'll be staying at the hotel in town for 3 days. After that, I'll be forced to take more official action. Brennan climbed back on his horse and rode away, leaving Maya standing on the porch. Feeling like her world was crumbling around her, she managed to hold herself together until Jake returned that evening. But when he walked into the kitchen and saw her sitting at the table staring at nothing, she finally broke. Maya? What's wrong? Jake was beside her in an instant, his hand on her shoulder. The kindness in his voice was her undoing. Maya buried her face in her hands and started crying. Not the quiet tears she'd shed when she thought about her father, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. Jake pulled a chair close to hers and gathered her into his arms. He didn't ask questions, just held her and let her cry until she had no tears left. Tell me what happened, he said gently when she'd finally calmed down. Between hiccups and shaky breaths, Maya told him everything. About her father's gambling, about the papers she'd signed without understanding them, about Brennan's threats and demands. Jake's arms tightened around her as she spoke, and she could feel the tension building in his body. $8,000, he said when she finished. I know it's impossible. I know I can't pay it, but Jake, I never meant for this to happen. I never meant to bring my problems into your life. Jake was quiet for a long time, his hand stroking her hair. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Why didn't you tell me about this before? Maya pulled back to look at him. Because our marriage was supposed to be a business arrangement. My past wasn't supposed to matter. Of course it matters. You matter. I was afraid, Maya whispered. Afraid you'd change your mind about marrying me if you knew the truth. Jake cupped her face in his hands, his gray eyes intense. Maya, do you really think I care about money more than I care about you? I don't know. We barely know each other. Jake, we've been married 6 weeks, and most of that time we've been pretending this is just a practical arrangement. Jake's jaw tightened. Is that what you think this is? Pretending? Maya looked into his eyes and saw hurt there, real pain that her words had caused. I don't know what this is anymore. Well, I do. Jake stood up abruptly, starting to pace around the kitchen. This stopped being just business the first night you stood watch with a rifle to protect our cattle. It stopped being pretend when you reorganized my whole life and made this house feel like a home. Jake, no, let me finish. I don't care about your father's debts or some bastard who's trying to collect them. I care about you, about us, about the life we're building here together. Maya felt fresh tears starting. You don't understand. Brennan can have me arrested. He can ruin both of us. Let him try. Jake's voice was hard now, determined. I'm not letting anyone take you away from here. This is your home. I'm your husband, and husband means I protect what's mine. I'm not your responsibility, Jake. Yes, you are. Jake knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. You became my responsibility the moment you grabbed my hand and said yes to marrying me. But more than that, you became important to me. More important than money or land grants or anything else. Maya stared at him, seeing something in his face. That took her breath away. Jake, what are you saying? I'm saying I love you, Maya. I don't know when it happened or how, but I do. And I'm not going to let some debt collector destroy what we have. The words hung in the air between them, changing everything. Maya felt her heart racing as she looked into Jake's eyes and saw the truth there. I love you too, she whispered, the words feeling both terrifying and wonderful. Jake's face lit up with relief and joy. He stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made Maya's knees weak. But even as she melted into his embrace, the shadow of Thomas Brennan's threats loomed over them. Love might be enough to change their hearts, but it wouldn't be enough to pay her father's debts. Jake rode into town the next morning with determination burning in his chest and a bank draft in his pocket for every dollar he could scrape together. It wasn't nearly enough to pay Maya's debt, but it was a start. He'd figure out the rest somehow. He found Thomas Brennan in the hotel dining room, eating breakfast like he didn't have a care in the world. The sight of the man's satisfied smile made Jake's hands clench into fists. "Mr. Brennan," Jake said, pulling out a chair without being invited to sit. Brennan looked up from his eggs with mild interest. "Ah, the husband. I wondered when you'd make an appearance. Let's get straight to business. How much will it take to make you disappear and leave my wife alone?" Brennan chuckled and set down his fork. "Your wife owes $8,000 plus interest and collection fees. That brings the total to just over $10,000. Jake felt like he'd been punched in the gut. $10,000 was more than his entire ranch was worth. "That's impossible." "Nothing's impossible, Mr. Sullivan. It just depends on how badly you want something." Brennan leaned back in his chair. "Of course, if you can't pay, I'm sure we can work out other arrangements. Your wife is quite lovely." Jake's chair scraped against the floor as he stood abruptly. "You stay away from her, then pay what she owes." "I'll pay what her father actually borrowed, nothing more." Brennan pulled out the loan documents and spread them on the table. "See this signature? That's your wife's name, guaranteeing payment of the full amount, legal and binding." Jake studied the papers, his heart sinking. The documents looked official, complete with witness signatures and notary seals. Even if Maya had been tricked into signing them, proving it would be nearly impossible. "You have 3 days to come up with the money," Brennan said, gathering up the papers. "After that, I contact the territorial marshal about fraud charges." Jake left the hotel feeling defeated. He'd spent the morning visiting the bank, talking to other ranchers, even considering selling his cattle. Nothing would raise enough money fast enough. He was so lost in thought that he almost didn't notice the commotion outside the general store. A crowd had gathered around a woman arguing loudly with Tom Bradley. "I don't care what it's worth to you," the woman was saying. "That horse is worth twice what you're offering, and you know it." Jake pushed through the crowd and stopped short when he saw who was doing the arguing. Maya stood beside a beautiful chestnut mare, her cheeks flushed with anger and determination. "Maya," Jake called out, "what are you doing here?" She turned at him with fire in her eyes. "I'm selling Lightning." Jake looked at the mare more closely. It was the horse Maya rode when she worked with Storm, a gentle animal she'd grown attached to over the past weeks. "You can't sell Lightning, she's yours." "She's the only thing of value I own," Maya said firmly. "Tom's offered me $50 for her." "That horse is worth at least $100, Jake protested. Tom Bradley shifted uncomfortably. "Jake, I can't afford to pay more than 50. Business has been slow." Before Jake could respond, a new voice cut through the crowd. "I'll give you $200 for her." Everyone turned to see a well-dressed stranger dismounting from a fine black stallion. He was younger than Jake, probably in his late 20s, with the kind of clothes that spoke of serious money. "200? Maya repeated, clearly shocked. The stranger smiled and tipped his hat. "I'm David Crawford. I breed horses for the cavalry, and I know quality when I see it. That Murray has excellent bloodlines." Maya looked at Lightning, then at Jake, then back at Crawford. $200 cash? "Cash," Crawford confirmed. "Sold," Maya said quickly before Jake could object. Crawford counted out the money and handed it to Maya, then led Lightning away. The crowd began to disperse, but Jake grabbed Maya's arm. "What are you thinking?" he demanded. $200 won't even make a dent in what Brennan wants. It's a start, Maya said, clutching the money tightly, and I have other ideas. Like, what? Maya looked around the busy street, then pulled Jake into the alley beside the general store for privacy. I've been thinking about this all night, she said. There has to be a way to prove those loan documents are fraudulent. Maya, the papers look legal. Even if your father tricked you, proving it would take months in court. We don't have months. Then, we need to find another way. Maya's voice was determined, but Jake could see the fear in her eyes. I won't let Brennan destroy what we've built together. Jake pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. We'll figure something out, I promise. But even as he said the words, Jake wasn't sure how he could keep that promise. That evening, they sat at the kitchen table with papers spread out in front of them, trying to come up with a plan. Maya had written down every asset they owned, every possible source of money. If we sold half the cattle, we could raise maybe $1,000, Maya said. That would cripple the ranch, Jake replied. We need those cattle for breeding. What about the land grant? Could we borrow against it? Jake shook his head. We don't actually own that land yet. The inspector hasn't even come to verify our marriage. Maya slumped in her chair. There has to be something we're missing. A knock at the door interrupted their planning. Jake opened it to find Carlos standing on the porch, hat in hand. Sorry to bother you folks so late, Carlos said, but I was in town earlier and heard about your trouble. Jake invited him in, and Carlos sat heavily at the table. I know it's not my business, Carlos said, but Pete and I have been talking. We know you're good people, and we hate to see you being threatened by some eastern snake. We appreciate that, Carlos, Jake said, but this isn't your fight. Maybe it is, Carlos replied. See, I've been thinking about those loan papers. Something doesn't smell right about them. Maya looked up with interest. What do you mean? Well, I've seen plenty of legal documents in my time. Worked for a lawyer back in San Antonio before. I came here, those papers Brennan showed around town today. The notary seal looked awful fresh for documents that are supposed to be over a year old. Jake felt a spark of hope. You think they might be forgeries? I think it's worth checking. Every notary keeps records of what they seal. If we could prove those documents were notarized recently instead of when your father was alive, Maya grabbed Carlos's hand. That would prove Brennan forged them. It's a long shot, Carlos warned. But it might be worth sending a telegram back east to check. The notary records. Jake was already reaching for his coat. The telegraph office stays open until 10. We can send a message tonight. As they prepared to leave for town, Maya caught Jake's arm. Jake, what if this doesn't work? What if we can't prove anything? Jake looked into her worried brown eyes and felt his heart clench. Then we'll figure out something else. But what if... Jake silenced her with a kiss, pouring all his love and determination into it. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Maya, I meant what I said yesterday. I love you. And I'm not going to let anyone take you away from me. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, we'll fight this together. Maya felt tears prick her eyes, but this time they were tears of hope instead of despair. I love you too. More than I ever thought possible. As they rode toward town with Carlos, Maya allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way out of this nightmare. But even if they couldn't, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't facing it alone anymore. The telegram arrived 2 days later, just hours before Brennan's deadline. Jake's hands shook as he read the response from the notary office in Philadelphia. What does it say? Maya asked, gripping his arm. Jake looked up with a grin that lit up his whole face. The notary seal on those loan documents? It was issued 3 months ago. Your father died over a year ago. Maya felt her knees go weak with relief. So Brennan forged them? That's exactly what it means. Jake pulled her into his arms and spun her around the telegraph office. He's been running a confidence game, probably targeting families like yours, all across the territory. They hurried back to the ranch to share the news with Carlos and Pete, who were waiting anxiously in the kitchen. I knew something wasn't right about that snake, Pete said, slapping the table. So what do we do now?
We.
Take this evidence to the territorial marshal, Jake said. Brennan picked the wrong family to swindle. But when they arrived at Brennan's hotel an hour later with the marshal, they found his room empty. The desk clerk nervously explained that Brennan had checked out that morning, claiming urgent business elsewhere, probably headed for the next territory, the marshal said grimly. These traveling con men never stay in one place long once they think someone's onto them. Maya felt a mix of relief and frustration. Brennan was gone, but he'd escaped justice. What if he comes back? He won't, the marshal assured her. Men like that are cowards. Once their game is exposed, they move on to easier targets. Walking back to their wagon, Maya suddenly stopped in the middle of the street. Jake, I just realized something. What? David Crawford. The man who bought Lightning yesterday. I never told him my name, but he knew exactly what kind of horse she was, knew about her bloodlines. Maya's eyes widened. What if he wasn't just passing through? What if he'd been watching us? Jake frowned. You think he was working with Brennan? Or maybe watching Brennan? Think about it. He appeared right when I needed money most, paid far more than Lightning was worth, and then disappeared. They looked at each other for a long moment, then Jake started laughing. What's so funny? Maya demanded. I think David Crawford might have been a federal marshal. The government's been tracking these traveling swindlers for months. They probably knew about Brennan's operation and were gathering evidence. Maya felt another wave of relief wash over her. So Lightning went to someone who'll take good care of her. I'd bet money on it. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Maya found herself thinking about everything that had happened since she'd first walked up their dusty road. Jake, she said quietly, I have an idea about the ranch. Oh? Jake looked at her with interest. What kind of idea? Maya took a deep breath. I've been thinking about what Crawford said about Lightning's bloodlines. What if we expanded into horse breeding seriously? Not just cattle, but horses too? Jake turned to face her fully. Go on. Storm has excellent bloodlines too. And I know horses, Jake. I learned everything my father knew before his gambling destroyed him. We could breed working horses, cavalry, mounts, even racing stock. Jake was quiet for a moment, considering. That would take a lot of capital to start up. Good breeding stock is expensive, Maya smiled. Not if we're smart about it. We already have Storm, and I know where to find quality Murrays at reasonable prices. My father had connections throughout the territory before everything went wrong. You'd want to contact people from your past? Just the horse breeders. The honest ones who knew my father before he got into trouble. Maya leaned forward, excitement growing in her voice. Jake, we could double our income within 2 years, maybe triple it. Jake studied her animated face, seeing a passion there. He'd never noticed before. You really love this, don't you? Horse breeding. I do. It's what I was meant to do before life got in the way. Maya reached for his hand. But only if you want to do it too. This is your ranch, your investment. Our ranch, Jake corrected firmly, our investment. And if you think we can make it work, then I trust your judgment. Maya felt tears of happiness prick her eyes. Really? Really? Tell me more about this plan of yours. They talked late into the night, with Maya sketching out breeding schedules and business projections while Jake asked practical questions about costs and timelines. By the time they went to bed, they had the outline of a real plan. Over. The next few weeks, Maya threw herself into research. She wrote letters to horse breeders across 3 territories, visited other ranches to study their operations, and spent hours working with Storm to assess his potential as a breeding stallion. The breakthrough came when she received a letter from an old friend of her father's in Colorado. Jake, Maya called, running into the house with the letter clutched in her hand. Listen to this. Jake looked up from the ledger he'd been updating. Good news? Better than good. Robert Harrison, he was my father's partner before the gambling started. He says he has 3 Murrays he'd be willing to trade for cattle plus a small cash payment. These aren't just any Murrays, Jake. Their bloodlines trace back to Arabian stock brought over from England. Jake set down his pen. What kind of trade? 5 head of cattle plus $200 for 3 quality breeding morays. Maya's eyes were shining with excitement. Jake, those morays could form the foundation of our entire breeding program. $200, Jake repeated thoughtfully. That's exactly what you got for lightning. Maya grinned. I thought you might see the poetry in that. Jake stood up and pulled her into his arms. You know what I see? What? I see my brilliant wife who just figured out how to turn a crisis into an opportunity. Maya felt her heart flutter. At the way he said my wife, like he truly meant it, like she truly belonged to him and he to her. So we'll do it? She asked. We'll do it. 6 months later, Maya stood in the pasture watching their first foal take its wobbly steps beside its mother. The young horse was perfect, strong legs, intelligent eyes, and the kind of spirit that made her think of Storm. Jake came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. Happy? He asked, his breath warm against her ear. Maya leaned into his embrace, feeling completely content for the first time in years. Happier than I ever thought possible, even though this isn't how you imagine getting married? Maya turned in his arms to face him. Jake Sullivan, this is exactly how I imagine getting married. To a man who trusts me, respects me, and loves me enough to build a life with me instead of just sharing one. Jake kissed her softly, then rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Maya Sullivan. I love you too. And I love what we've built together. As they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Maya reflected on the strange path that had brought them together. She'd come to his ranch desperate and alone, looking for nothing more than a job and a meal. Instead, she'd found a partner, a purpose, and a love deeper than anything she'd dared to dream. Jake, she said suddenly, Mom? Do you ever regret giving me that choice? Work for food or be your wife? Jake chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. Not for a single second. Best decision I ever made. Maya smiled, watching their horses graze peacefully in the evening light. Mine too.